The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows of Harmony Music Academy in downtown Los Angeles as Carlos Santana, dressed in a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans, walked through the front door carrying a beat-up guitar case that had seen decades of use. At 72 years old, Carlos moved slowly and deliberately, his silver hair slightly unkempt from the California breeze, looking exactly like the kind of older gentleman who might finally have time to pursue the musical dreams he'd put aside for practical concerns decades earlier. Behind the reception desk sat Marcus Chen, a 28-year-old guitar instructor and academy coordinator who had graduated from USC's music program 3 years earlier and prided himself on his ability to assess students' skill levels within the first few minutes of meeting them. When Marcus saw the elderly Latino man approach with his weathered guitar case, he immediately assumed he was dealing with a complete beginner, or perhaps someone returning to music after many years away from it. What happened over the next 30 minutes would become one of the most talked about moments in the Academy's history, as Marcus challenged Carlos to demonstrate his abilities with the condescending tone of someone who believed he was about to witness amateur-level playing, only to discover that the unassuming elderly student was actually one of the most celebrated guitarists in the world. Marcus had been working at Harmony Music Academy since graduating from college, teaching both private lessons and group classes to students ranging from absolute beginners to intermediate players. He took pride in his formal education and his ability to quickly identify areas where students needed improvement. The Academy specialized in helping older students who had always wanted to learn guitar but had never had the opportunity, and Marcus had developed what he considered an efficient approach to assessment and instruction for this demographic. When Carlos approached the reception desk, Marcus looked up from his computer with a professional but somewhat patronizing smile. "Good afternoon," Marcus said. "I'm guessing you're here about guitar lessons? You've come to the right place. We specialize in helping folks your age get started with music." Carlos smiled politely. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with someone about possibly sitting in on some advanced classes. I'd like to see what kind of instruction you offer at higher levels." Marcus raised an eyebrow, slightly amused by what he perceived as an overestimation of ability. "Advanced classes? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Those classes are for students who have been playing for years and have developed considerable technical proficiency." "How long have you been playing guitar?" "Oh, about 55 years, Carlos replied matter-of-factly. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, though he remained skeptical. 55 years? That's impressive. Though I have to say, a lot of self-taught players think they're more advanced than they actually are. Formal technique and proper fundamentals are really important for progressing beyond basic chord strumming." "I understand," Carlos said patiently. "That's why I'd like to observe some advanced instruction. I'm always interested in learning new approaches." Marcus stood up from his desk, his confidence growing as he prepared to demonstrate his expertise. "Tell you what," he said, "before we talk about advanced classes, why don't we do a quick assessment? That way I can recommend the appropriate level for you to start at." Carlos nodded agreeably. "That sounds reasonable." Marcus led Carlos to a small practice room equipped with an amplifier and several guitars. "We'll start with something simple," Marcus explained, settling into his teaching mode. "I want you to show me what you can do. Just play whatever comes naturally to you, and I'll get a sense of your current skill level." Carlos opened his guitar case and removed a well-worn Gibson SG, its body showing the kind of wear that comes from decades of professional use. Marcus noticed the guitar, but didn't recognize its significance. To him, it just looked like an old, beaten-up instrument that an amateur player might have owned for years without taking proper care of it. "That's quite a vintage guitar," Marcus said with mild interest. "Though it looks like it's seen better days. We have some newer instruments here if you'd prefer to use something in better condition." "This one will be fine," Carlos replied, plugging the guitar into the amplifier and making minor adjustments to the settings. It's comfortable for me. Marcus positioned himself in a chair across from Carlos, clipboard in hand, ready to take notes on areas that would need improvement. Okay, he said with the tone of someone addressing a student. Show us what you can do. Carlos positioned the guitar across his lap, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to play. What emerged from the amplifier was nothing like what Marcus had expected to hear. The sound was immediately recognizable as something extraordinary, warm, singing, and imbued with a spiritual quality that seemed to transform the small practice room into a sacred space. Carlos's fingers moved across the fretboard with fluid grace, creating melodies that were both technically sophisticated and emotionally profound. The music that flowed from Carlos's guitar was a masterpiece of tone, technique, and expression. Every note was perfectly placed, every bend was controlled with surgical precision, and every phrase told a story that spoke directly to the listener's soul. The sustained notes sang with the kind of vocal quality that only true masters can achieve, and the overall sound carried the unmistakable signature of someone who had spent decades perfecting their craft at the highest levels of musical artistry. Carlos played for about 5 minutes, weaving together elements of blues, Latin music, rock, and jazz in a way that transcended genre boundaries. His playing demonstrated not just technical mastery, but a deep understanding of how to use the guitar as a vehicle for emotional and spiritual expression. The music was simultaneously complex and accessible, showing influences from multiple cultural traditions while maintaining a distinctly personal voice. When Carlos finished his demonstration and looked up at Marcus, the silence in the room was profound. Marcus sat frozen, his clipboard forgotten in his lap, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The playing had been so far beyond anything he had expected that he was struggling to reconcile it with his initial assessment of Carlos as a typical older beginner. That was, Marcus began, then stopped, unable to find appropriate words. Carlos smiled gently. How did I do? Marcus stood up, his professional composure completely shattered. Who are you? That wasn't amateur playing. That wasn't even advanced amateur playing. That was... He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. That was professional-level mastery. Carlos remained seated with his guitar, maintaining the same humble demeanor he had shown since entering the academy. I appreciate the feedback. Do you think I might be ready for those advanced classes? Marcus was beginning to realize the magnitude of his error. Sir, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your abilities based on your age and appearance, and I was completely wrong. That playing was extraordinary. Are you a professional musician? Carlos considered the question for a moment. Yes, I've been fortunate enough to make a living playing music for most of my adult life. What's your name? Marcus asked, though part of him was almost afraid to hear the answer. Carlos Santana, came the quiet reply. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went white as the full realization crashed over him. For the past hour, he had been treating Carlos Santana, one of the most celebrated and influential guitarists in the history of popular music, like a typical elderly beginner who needed basic assessment and guidance. Oh my God, Marcus whispered, looking around the room as if seeking confirmation that this was really happening. You're Carlos Santana. The Carlos Santana. I just asked Carlos Santana to show me what he could do on guitar. Carlos nodded with characteristic humility. That's right. And you know what? That was exactly the right thing to do. Any good teacher should want to assess a student's abilities before recommending appropriate instruction. Marcus was nearly in shock. But I treated you like a beginner. I talked down to you. I suggested you might not be ready for advanced classes. I offered you a different guitar because yours looked old and worn out. Carlos smiled warmly. Marcus, you were doing your job. You were being professional and thorough. There's nothing wrong with that approach. But you're one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, Marcus protested. You've sold millions of albums. You're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was explaining to you how guitar instruction works. Carlos stood up and placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. And you did a good job explaining it. You were clear, you were organized, and you were trying to help someone you thought needed guidance. Those are all admirable qualities in a teacher. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe I asked you to show me what you can do. That's like asking Picasso to demonstrate that he knows how to hold a paintbrush. Carlos laughed gently. But here's the thing, Marcus. I learned something valuable from this experience, and I hope you can too. Marcus looked confused. You learned something from me? Absolutely, Carlos replied. You reminded me that musical ability isn't something you can judge by appearances. The fact that you couldn't tell I was a musician just by looking at me proves that real artistry lives in the playing, not in how someone looks or presents themselves. Carlos gestured around the practice room. This academy serves a really important function. There are probably hundreds of older people in this city who have musical dreams they've never pursued, and places like this give them the opportunity to explore those dreams. Your role in that process is valuable and meaningful. Marcus was beginning to understand the deeper lesson Carlos was sharing. You're saying that my assumptions about older students might be limiting. I'm saying that every student who walks through that door deserves the same respect and opportunity, regardless of their age or appearance, Carlos replied. Some of them might be absolute beginners, and that's wonderful. Everyone starts somewhere, but some of them might surprise you with what they already know or what they're capable of learning. Carlos picked up his guitar again and played a brief, beautiful melody. When I was young, I had teachers who believed in my potential, even when I couldn't demonstrate it yet. They saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. That's what great teachers do. They help people discover abilities they didn't know they had. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I was so focused on categorizing you based on superficial characteristics that I almost missed the opportunity to witness something incredible. Exactly, Carlos said. And imagine if you had insisted on starting me in a beginner class without letting me demonstrate what I could do. We both would have missed out on a valuable experience. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the practice room door. The academy's director had heard about what was happening and wanted to meet the famous visitor. But before opening the door, Carlos turned back to Marcus one more time. Marcus, I want to thank you for the assessment. It reminded me why I love music. It's not about recognition or status. It's about the pure joy of creating something beautiful with an instrument. That joy is exactly the same whether you're playing for 20 people or 20,000 people. Marcus extended his hand for a handshake, which Carlos accepted warmly. Mr. Santana, thank you for being so gracious about my mistake. I'll never forget this lesson about not judging people by their appearance. Carlos smiled. Keep teaching, Marcus. Keep helping people discover their musical potential. Just remember to let them show you what they're capable of before you decide what they need to learn. The story of Marcus's assessment of Carlos Santana spread quickly through the music education community, but rather than becoming a source of embarrassment for Marcus, it became a powerful teaching story about the importance of open-minded assessment and the dangers of making assumptions about students based on demographics. Marcus completely changed his approach to student evaluation after meeting Carlos. He developed new assessment protocols that focused on letting students demonstrate their abilities, rather than making assumptions based on age, appearance, or background. He also became an advocate for treating every student with the respect and attention that their musical potential deserved. When the Academy's director asked Marcus to write about the experience for their newsletter, he concluded his article with a quote from Carlos. The most important thing any music teacher can do is create space for students to surprise themselves. You never know when someone might walk through your door carrying 55 years of musical experience in a beat-up guitar case. Years later, when Marcus had become one of the most respected guitar instructors in Los Angeles. He would often tell his students about the day Carlos Santana taught him the most important lesson of his teaching career: that real musical mastery has nothing to do with appearances, and everything to do with the willingness to let the music speak for itself. The impact of that afternoon extended far beyond Marcus's personal teaching philosophy. Word of Carlos's visit to Harmony Music Academy spread throughout the Los Angeles music community, attracting attention from musicians, educators, and music lovers who were inspired by both Carlos's humility and the profound lesson about assumptions and respect. The Academy's director, Dr. Sarah Williams, used the incident as a catalyst for developing new training programs for music educators throughout the region. She created workshops focused on recognizing and overcoming unconscious bias in music education, helping instructors understand how superficial judgments could prevent them from recognizing and nurturing genuine talent. Carlos, meanwhile, became an occasional guest at the Academy, dropping by unannounced to listen to student performances and offer encouragement. He never made a big production of these visits, preferring to sit quietly in the back of group classes and applaud earnestly for beginning students struggling through their first scales. His presence had a transformative effect on the students, who found themselves playing with more confidence and joy when they realized that one of the world's great guitarists was genuinely interested in their progress. Marcus often reflected on how close he had come to missing the extraordinary demonstration, simply because of his preconceptions. The thought that he might have dismissed Carlos and recommended beginner lessons without ever hearing him play became a constant reminder of the importance of remaining open to possibilities that challenge our expectations. The relationship between Marcus and Carlos evolved into a genuine mentorship, though not in the direction Marcus might have originally expected. Rather than Carlos seeking guitar instruction, Marcus found himself learning about the deeper aspects of musical expression, performance psychology, and the spiritual dimensions of making music that formal education had never addressed. During one of their conversations, Carlos shared insight that became central to Marcus's teaching philosophy. The guitar doesn't care about your credentials, your degrees, or your reputation. It only responds to the sincerity and passion you bring to it. When you meet a new student, try to sense their passion first, then worry about their technique. This perspective transforms not only Marcus's approach to assessment, but his entire relationship with music education. He began incorporating more intuitive and emotional elements into his structured curriculum, finding that students responded with greater enthusiasm when they felt their individual musical personalities were being recognized and developed, rather than simply corrected. The Academy also established the Carlos Santana open door policy, ensuring that any student could request a performance-based assessment, regardless of their age, background, or initial appearance. This policy led to the discovery of several remarkably talented students who might otherwise have been placed in inappropriate beginner classes, including a 78-year-old former jazz pianist whose arthritis had forced her to switch to guitar, and a 65-year-old construction worker who had been playing blues harmonica professionally for decades and was looking to expand into guitar. Marcus's experience with Carlos also influenced his approach to working with students from diverse cultural backgrounds. He realized that his formal, Western-centric musical education had given him only one lens through which to view musical ability, and that there were entire universes of musical tradition and expression that didn't fit neatly into conventional assessment categories. When music education publications began interviewing Marcus about his teaching methods, he always credited Carlos with teaching him that the most important quality any educator can possess is intellectual humility, the recognition that every person you encounter might have something valuable to teach you if you're wise enough to listen. The story also had a lasting impact on Carlos himself. In later interviews, he often mentioned the afternoon at Harmony Music Academy as a reminder of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. "Marcus treated me exactly the way I wanted to be treated," Carlos would say, not as a celebrity or a famous musician, but as someone who loved music and wanted to share that love with others. That's what music is really about, the connection between people who share a passion for creating something beautiful. The beat-up Gibson SG that Carlos had played during his assessment became something of a legend at the academy. Students would often ask to see the guitar that fooled Marcus, not realizing that the instrument's worn appearance was actually a testament to decades of professional use and the countless hours Carlos had spent perfecting his craft. Carlos eventually donated a similar vintage guitar to the Academy's collection, with a plaque that read, "In memory of the day I learned that wisdom comes in many forms, and great teachers are always learning from their students, Carlos Santana." The instrument became a centerpiece of the Academy's philosophy, reminding both instructors and students that musical greatness is measured not by appearance or credentials, but by the depth of feeling and authenticity that a musician brings to their art. Today, the story of Marcus's assessment of Carlos Santana has become a staple of music education conferences and workshops around the world. It's used as a case study in courses on cultural competency, bias recognition, and student assessment, helping new generations of music educators understand the profound impact that assumptions and expectations can have on their teaching effectiveness. For Marcus, now in his early 40s and recognized as one of the most innovative guitar instructors on the West Coast, the memory of that afternoon remains as vivid as ever. His students often notice a particular gleam in his eyes when he talks about the importance of letting music speak for itself, and they understand that they're hearing not just theoretical knowledge, but wisdom earned through a moment of profound personal transformation. The lesson that Carlos Santana taught Marcus that day, that musical mastery transcends all superficial categories and can surprise us in the most unexpected ways, continues to influence music education practices and remind teachers everywhere that their next student might just change everything they think they know about music, learning, and the infinite potential that exists in every human being who picks up an instrument with love and hope in their heart.